Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. India and Russia are in advanced negotiations for a new bilateral investment treaty, External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar said on Monday, addressing a business event that was also attended by Russian Deputy Prime Minister and Trade Minister Denis Manturov. Dr. Jaishankar described India's relationship with Russia as among the steadiest major relationships of the world. He, however, emphasized on the need now to address the growing trade imbalance with Russia. The annual bilateral trade between India and Russia has gone up to $45 billion this year, driven largely by India's increased purchases of Russian crude. India is exploring means to increase its exports to Russia across a slew of sectors. So the scope to expand economic cooperation and the impediments related to market access, logistics, also payments that need to be addressed by both India and Russia is what we will focus on in today's edition of Perspective. I'm pleased to welcome three distinguished guests on the program. With me in the studio is Mr. Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. And joining me virtually is Professor Manoj Pant, former Vice Chancellor, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, and former Ambassador S Thyal. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of Perspective. To you first, Mr. Bansal, tell us and our viewers about this new bilateral investment treaty that the External Affairs Minister spoke about between India and Russia, which is said to be in advanced stage of negotiations.
See, India and Russia were already talking in terms of a trade treaty, which when the COVID pandemic hit, probably took a backseat, and now we are talking again about it, that India-Eurasian Economic Union, free trade agreement, the process which is now in very, very advanced stage. Now, this particular Eurasian Economic Union comprises of 5 states, which is primarily driven by Russia and includes Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. As you realize that after the Russia-Ukraine war, there has been a quantitative jump as far as India-Russia trade is concerned, and primarily in terms of crude, which we have been importing in large quantities from Russia. And of course, this crude has been processed by Indian refineries, and whose exports of the products have also doubled if you actually look at it. But with respect to Russia, there is a trade imbalance because we are importing a huge quantity of crude and we are not exporting other equipment, other goods to Russia to that extent. I think, and consequently, rupee-ruble trade is not working as well as it should be. Right. Now we are trying to include more people, more countries to get into the ambit where this rupee trade could expand. But by this particular mechanism of free trade, I think Indian consumer goods, there are large number of consumer goods which used to be supplied to former Soviet Union when there was a rupee-ruble trade, which discontinued with the passage of time. I think what we are looking at is that we will be in a position to export large number of consumer goods to Russia because many of these goods were being imported from Western countries earlier. Now with that chain breaking up, we'll have to look at different issues. Also, it has to look at certain mechanisms as to how this trade should progress further because IIFT and other Western financial institutions are not available to Russia now. Yes. And I think we have to look for new mechanisms for trading with Russia. In fact, as I said earlier, there were talks of incorporating newer countries where rupee trade could be established, where we could probably give rupees for the crudes imported from Russia, and Russia could use those rupees to buy from a third country products also. That is also being looked at it. But this news coming yesterday, actually, that we are in a very advanced stage, this will actually bolster the trade between the two things. I think what we need to further do is also bolster greater connectivity because there is no direct connectivity. We'll have to look at flights and greater flights. North-South corridor is one issue which has been talked of for a very, very long period of time. Also, a large number of people would like to come to India because tourists from these countries has also been an issue. Absolutely.
So how to tackle some of these impediments that you just pointed out, how to expand the economic cooperation in the times to come is something that we'll come back to and discuss in just a moment. But Professor Pant, your perspective on the bilateral investment treaty that External Affairs Minister spoke about with Russia, how significant is it going to be in terms of boosting confidence of the investors, in terms of protecting their investment?
I think the main purpose, this is not a new treaty. We've been trying to work on including Russia along with its neighboring countries, Armenia, Belarus, etc., who are part of our union there for some time now, I think 4 or 5 years. I think the big factor that's come is the Ukraine war. Suddenly, a lot of trade is boosted with India and Russia. Mainly, as Mr. Bansal mentioned, is we are importing much more oil.
Yeah.
Now, here I think and of course, we're exporting a lot more consumer goods, which earlier Russia has to get from the West. So I understand that. Now, here the issue for us is, I think that's what they're going to have to address, is the treaty could advance ruble trade, a rupee ruble trade. Now, a rupee ruble trade, when both the currencies are not hard currencies, is extremely beneficial to us because we have high trade deficit with Russia. Now, high trade deficit means we are accumulating, a lot of rubles, which may not be very useful to us because you cannot use them for third-party trade. So, advancing Indo-rupee, rupee-ruble trade is, I think, the major purpose of what the bilateral treaty should be. And this makes it very useful in terms of, in particular, import of oil, which is very important for us because it's a major we refine and export the refined oil to other countries. So it's going to work extremely well as long as we can get the rupee ruble trade, which is almost like barter trade, into operation. Now, how far Russia will go with us in that, particularly in the context of oil imports, I don't know. How much will Russia be willing to accept rupee payments with ruble for oil? I don't know. If we can push that, if we can let Indo-Russian trade maybe include a bit of other countries too. The other countries are very small, Armenia, Belarus, won't matter much. If we can make this a major factor in our trading relations, that we are taking payments in rubles and we are making payments in rupees, it's a huge boost for the Indian consumer goods industry, which is frankly at a very nascent stage at this stage. So that's a critical part. I believe that if that does not work out, then this is not going to work too well.
Right. Ambassador, let me bring in you here to understand, and before we get on to address the issue of trade imbalance, what both countries are doing to address this problem, why is the rupee-ruble trade not working? Both of us agreed to actually trade in our currencies, but what has been the biggest impediment to trading in our currencies?
See, when we had rupee-ruble trade, it was with Soviet Union, which had import restrictions from goods from the West. So India could export some medium quality and not so top quality goods and consumer goods. But now the situation has changed and the Russian consumer now wants top of the line stuff. That is one part of the story. Second is that if you look at the trade figures of the last 10 years before 2022, then also the trade deficit has been against us. We exported about $3 billion every year and $6 to $7 billion was export from Russia because energy and other things were still in the mix. So the first thing is that, of course, now the trade is $46 billion and most of it is jumping because we are getting oil at a very discounted price. So one thing we must note is that India has been buying oil from all over the world now, paying hard currency, whether it is Iraq or Iran or Saudi Arabia or any other country. We have been paying them in hard currency. So it is not something that a new additional burden has come on our foreign exchange resources. Second, because of these sanctions which have been imposed on Russian banking system, Russian ruble currency, there some circumstances are arising which are akin to the rupee-ruble trade up to which was there up to early 1990. But the problem is the same, that what can we sell to Russia?
Right.
Russia, there is a list of about 500 items which has been circulated by the Russian embassy to Indian exporters. And there is a lot of effort politically also from top quarter leadership and policymakers from both sides that Russia should be buying more from India. But earlier, again, I will point out that in the Soviet times, all the foreign trade was controlled by the Soviet companies, which were the public sector companies. But now consumer goods and other importers in Russia are from the private sector. We are still seeing there's a lot of policy making effort that India should invest in Far East of Russia. We remember that Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji himself had gone there 2019,
Yes.
2021. Our Minister Hardeep Puri took a very large delegation of energy sector companies. But those investments have not really fructified. One, the entire scenario, we have to be very conscious of law and order and justice system in Russia is something which our private sector is not very comfortable with. I'm being very honest here because it is a policy channel, and we have to be conscious of what are the impediments. And
So, Ambassador,
we
is
see
it
that
because of
most our-
connectivity issues, or are there problems related to logistics? Why is there lack of interest from the private sector in the area?
Yes.
Ambassador?
Yeah, this is, see, there have to be goods to be exported. We are talking also of international north-south transport corridor through Iran, which can go up to Russia and Central Asia. But the bitter reality is that there is not much goods which we are competitive to sell and export in those on those new tracks. So that is where the issue lies. China is right next door to Russia, Russian Far East, and they have direct channel of train links and through Kazakhstan to hinterland of Russia. So they have a logistics advantage. And there, a container, I was told a container of paints from India to Russia through northern ports it costs about $5,000-6,000, which is much more than the cost of paints itself. So issues are very difficult to crack because they change the dynamics of the trade and the profitability totally. So we have to think of something innovative and go for more value-added goods so that they can be transported by air.
Right.
Whether it is pharma goods, for instance, so Soviet Union used to be full of Indian pharmaceutical products.
Let me take that question to Mr. Bansal. So, as Russia seeks more Indian investments in its Far East, India wants to expand its export basket to Russia. The question here is, how do both sides now diversify and export in terms of the goods that we are talking about? For India particularly, which are the areas in which we can explore greater possibilities?
See, the foreign minister's statement, it said that there are 500 different products that Russia is exploring for imports. But the fact of the matter is that what we were exporting during Soviet period, after the disintegration of Soviet Union, large number of export of these products were discontinued, maybe because of quality issues. But now again, when the Western sanctions are in force, I'm sure Indian products qualitatively have improved. There are large number of consumer goods which could be exported, which are used from day-to-day products. We will have to establish a market because that market has been wiped off during a period of time. And as the ambassador said, transportation has been a big issue. We need to understand that we don't share a direct land border with Russia. But so is the case with Armenia. Armenia also doesn't have a direct land border with Russia, unlike the other 4 countries. So obviously, that goods coming to Armenia or going from Armenia, which is of course a former Soviet Union, former Soviet state, so must be going through third countries' areas. Shipping costs, yes, they may be high. That's why North-South corridor becomes very important. I think at some stage we will have to actually start exploring a transportation corridor through Xinjiang. I think at some stage we will have to start looking at Karakoram Pass as one of the point for taking goods to Kyrgyzstan and from Kyrgyzstan to Kazakhstan or something like that. Because if we actually have to access Central Asia, we have been looking at Chabahar, we have been looking at other things which have really taken too long. I think we may at some stage have to start looking at this if relations with China normalize, as seemed to be the case some time back. Of course, now in the present geopolitical tensions, it looks very, very unlikely. Another thing which we need to understand is that we need to widen the scope, because while we may not have products which we want to probably export to Russia, country like UAE may have something. UAE is one of our largest trading partners, amongst the top 3 trading partners. So maybe we might send something to UAE. UAE may export something to Russia. Now the thing is of acceptability of the currency. If the rupee trade is acceptable, because we don't get piled up with ruble, it is actually the Russia which is getting piled up with, because if he is trading in rupee and we are buying oil, then they have a huge chunk of rupee which they have to use, and for that there should be a third country which is willing to sell goods in rupee. And I think what I hear is that UAE and some other countries are considering trading in rupee, and that would enhance the acceptability, because a country like UAE, which is a huge trading economy, where actually a large number of Indian goods are exported primarily for exporting it to third countries, could become a very major point from where rupee trade could probably take off.
Right.
But I think all these issues are at primary stage, and I think this huge trade imbalance has occurred because Russia has now become our primary supplier of crude oil, for overtaking Iraq, which had overtaken Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, earlier our main imports from Russia were of defense goods, which continue to be a large chunk, but crude we are getting. And when people talk of trade imbalance, they often forget that our refineries are exporting products. So there are other countries which have a trade imbalance with India, because we are exporting products to them. So
but given the geopolitical scenario, Russia looking more towards Asia now, it is an opportunity for India to expand its relationship with Russia, which has largely been about military, nuclear and space cooperation, isn't it?
Undoubtedly, but we need to look at it. The point is that with the conflict continuing, Russia is banking more and more on China. So now for Russia, it's a very complex situation, balancing India and China. Because in recent years, India-China relations have become tense after Doklam and of course then Galwan. Unless of course China takes initiative to resolve its differences with India, and being a bigger economy, bigger country, it is China's prerogative to take those initiatives to do that. I think this banking on Asia and Russian aim of a Eurasian arrangements which they keep thinking and talking of from the Soviet Union days will become difficult. So I think geopolitically it's a very important facet that Russia is dependent on India, but Russia has become more dependent on China,
right,
because of this conflict.
Clearly. Professor Pant, coming back to the issue of trade imbalance, and when we say both sides are working towards this problem, it's important for both sides to address impediments like the logistics problems that we've discussed, the issue of payments, the issue of transportation, which remains a huge roadblock. How big a stumbling block is the problem of market access, also issues like non-tariff barriers? Have they also contributed to the Russia-India trade imbalance?
I don't think so. If you look back to, I think way back in 19 when I was there in Moscow, at that time, the issues of non-tariff barriers not so insufferable. I mean, they're not so difficult to get around. It's very clear there are no real issues. We export mainly things like pharma products, then we export some diamond jewelry. I mean, there's some stuff like this we export, and we mainly now import oil. Remember, look at the perspective. In 2021, our total bilateral trade balance was 8 billion. Now it's something like 30 billion. We don't go to the levels unless something extraordinary has happened. And the extraordinary factor today is the Ukraine war. Now, again, I'm going to repeat. From India's perspective, this is a great thing if we can push rupee-ruble trade. Mr. Bansal is right. Question, problem issue is the ball is in Russia's court, not ours. We are very happy with it. Well, I don't see there's a further problem in logistics. Now, this also is being addressed in the context of India also getting access to the eastern or northeastern part of Russia, mainly the gas and other resources. But in here, China has moved much faster than India. The geopolitics you cannot ignore. I think the economist is the one who keeps saying, please look at geopolitics first than economics. The geopolitics is critical. From India's point of view, this is not where it's at. And for us, it's a pure economic thing. We are getting oil extremely cheap. There's no doubt we are building reserves with the Russian oil. How long will it last if, let's say, in the next 6 months, the Ukraine crisis gets resolved? I don't believe Russians will agree to continue providing us oil. They still don't, as far as I'm aware, provide us oil on rupee payments. Now, when that happens, can rupee become the basis of exchange between India, UK, UAE, and Russia? I don't think so. I'll be honest with you. We are still not large enough as the world trading power for everyone to find rupee acceptable. Most of UAE trade is also in hard currency. The second factor, much of the trade that we have, the logistics part is mentioned, takes place in shipping. Shipping is not owned by any country. And that's where the crucial US sanctions, sort of kick in. Minute you have to transport anything in a shipping area, in a shipping line which invoices in dollars, they will not do it. And similarly, you have to create these wash-through accounts with banks to accept payments. Now, even if we were to able to find a shipping channel, which they have been working on some time from the eastern side, as Mr. Bansal mentioned, will they accept will they be agreeing to go out sanctions? I don't think so. So this is inexplicably linked to the Indo-Russia, US, China issue. Last, let me mention China. Yes, China actually is important politically for Russia, not economics. The Chinese depend on the American market, not the US. The Russian market can never be at all it's a substitute for the American market. So for China, for Russia, the Chinese thing is a great thing. For India, the Russian thing is a great thing. Now, the three-way thing, of course, is politically not possible, certainly not in my lifetime.
Okay,
So I
Ambassador.
just see this as something which we should keep pushing, the Indo-rupee, the rupee-ruble trade, we should keep pushing. Look for logistics, look for communications. That's the most important factor, as long as we can, and see how long it survives the end of the Ukraine war.
Okay, Ambassador, your perspective on geopolitics driving geoeconomics as far as India-Russia trade relationship is concerned, and minus the impediments, there is huge scope. Both sides want to expand their relationship. So in terms of the future expansion of our trade engagements with Russia, what is the way forward? What is required in the short term?
On this payment for Russian oil issue, I believe that already payment is being done in UAE dirhams, most of the payment through UAE. Now, then the next step would be that India-UAE trade, if it can be in rupee and dirham, then there is some possibility of it's a sort of indirect rupee ruble. But as I said earlier, in any case, we pay for our oil in foreign exchange historically. So it is not an additional burden on our foreign exchange resources. Now, of course, geopolitics is very much important in economics. I don't see anytime soon any resolution to the Ukraine problem which will be such that the sanctions on Russia would be lifted. And so this kind of scenario is likely to continue for a few years. And this is all a very rapidly changing situation. India has to be very nimble, as we have been by import of oil from Russia. I think we have displayed some very deft diplomacy and economy, and there has not been any sanction against India. West has accepted this. We have been able to keep the price below $60. So somewhere there's some fig leaf that we are also adhering to the red lines of the sanctions. But China and Russia are coming closer because more and more energy, if you look at the 20-25-year perspective of the Russian energy going to China, for which China is investing in new pipelines and etc. So the Chinese dependence on gas and oil will be on Kazakhstan, Central Asia, and more on Russia. So they are coming closer. And to that extent, the relationship between India and Russia may not in future have that kind of economic heft unless we keep on buying this very substantial amount of oil from Russia.
Right. In fact, the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Bansal, the Deputy Prime Minister on his India visit has said Russia relies on trusted foreign partners such as India for certain components and technologies which it will use in the current times, in the future as well. So in these areas, especially when we say technology, have we expanded our collaboration?
I think that is where I feel there's a lot of scope. Indian software, Russian hardware, we can have a lot of collaboration, especially in the defense sector. We have done BrahMos, but we have a capacity for huge collaboration in the defense sector because Russians have an expertise in the armament industry, and I think Indian software prowess is now recognized globally. In fact, if you look at Foreign Minister's, External Affairs Minister's statement, he has said the Russians intend to import components of cars, aircraft, and I don't know, whole lot of things. Because what we have been doing is that we have been exporting components to various Western companies as well. Like nowadays, you know, Boeing gets components made in India. There are a large number of softwares which are actually developed in India for Western companies. I think this could also be done as far as Russia is concerned. And of course, we have to look at large consumer products which we can sell like tea, etc. Russians are not much of a tea drinkers, but still we can look at other products which we can export to Russia. And I think scope for this trade to expand. And this will expand when you have a number of other countries
and especially
involved.
the FTA will help in greater collaboration.
Because you will have other
areas.
countries which have some things which they could probably import from India.
Clearly. So India and Russia relationship has been a time-tested one. Of course, as all our panelists have suggested, there is huge potential, immense scope to further expand this relationship. But of course, there are also certain impediments which need to be tackled. For example, from India's perspective, the trade imbalance is something that we are dealing with. We are trying to address with Russia. On the Russian side, they want greater investment from India in the Far East region, which picked up well really before the COVID pandemic. But due to the COVID pandemic, then the Russia-Ukraine war, and then certain challenges that the private sector faced in the region has put some kind of a stumbling block in that kind of engagement. So we hope with constant efforts and, as Ambassador said, with continuous engagement at the diplomatic level, we will be able to tackle these impediments and see great India-Russia trade relationships see greater heights. That having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Perspective today, sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad.